Dr. Dewey Caron, who is a professor emeritus of entomology and wildlife ecology at the University of Delaware. And since he retired, he moved to Portland to be closer to his grandkids. And he, even in his retirement, remains very active in education on honeybee biology and beekeeping. He is the author of several books, including Honeybee Biology and Beekeeping, a big textbook that's used by universities in their beekeeping classes. I have one at home, and I think Dewey brought some copies today that people could purchase if they wanted to. There's several other books that he authored and co-authored. He teaches in several master beekeeping programs, including the OSU Master Beekeeper Program, and gives talks at clubs throughout the region. He's also running a survey on overwintering hives, including hobbyists with only a few hives and sideliners and commercial beekeepers as well. He has spent quite a bit of time working with Africanized bees in Panama and Bolivia, and he has family down there and spends several months out of the year in Bolivia working with Africanized bees. So if you have any questions about that, Dewey would be a great person to ask.
I'm going to talk about tonight dead colonies and swarming, so let's start with the dead colony. One of our first activities in spring is to take a look at our colonies. Now, this hasn't been a great spring for bees, but take a look at our colonies and take a look at those that haven't survived or are dead outs, because we like to pick up the equipment, save the bees from robbing. There's no pathogens left, so there's no mites left, there's no virus disease left that probably killed the bees over the winter period, but it's still a good idea to get that equipment up, get it scraped, get it ready to repopulate with some more bees or with a split, something of that nature. So, and I talk about spring and looking, I suggest that you try to do a little bit CSI, a little bit of why did this colony not survive? Now, that can be a lot of colonies. We're losing in our backyard beekeepers, individuals with less than fewer colonies, we're losing about 40% of the colonies that we try to get over winter. 40%. This is a 13-year average, all right? So it's not just, some years it's over 50%. The past year was a little bit over 25%, 28%. And this year, so far, the survey is running about the same. So we've had, fortunately, a couple years. I say fortunate, in other words, losing one of 4 backyard colonies, that's still not very good. And of course, some people are losing all of them or a lot more, or some are not losing any. So try to take a look at what happened. This is a case of a spring dead out. In other words, they got through the winter. The colony queen was doing very well in the spring. She was laying eggs after the 1st of January. So this is some cap brood that had already gotten from the egg stage all the way to the pupal stage. You can see the bees that they were clustered on that. They were clustered on adjacent frames. So this is a medium frame above a full depth frame. So this is what we call a 1.5. Full depth, medium frame. This is where the bees were. They moved upward in winter, but you notice there is no honey. There's no honey in these frames, and there was really no honey in the rest of the colony, even the frames all the way over on the edge. Now, in a bigger colony, it will often look something like this. So that you'll find this dead cluster. They did not survive on 3 or 4 frames. So the first thing you look for is there honey. You can see there's no honey here at all, looking on adjacent frames. And we can say that probably they died from starvation. The other thing that you need to look at is how many bees were there when they died. And it takes a critical mass. And in springs that are up and down, okay, where we get that cold snap, after we get a warm spell, pollen available, they get out, they start rearing brood, then we get that cold snap. If there are not enough adult bees to form that cluster, in other words, that critical mass, you can lose the colony simply because there are not enough bees. However, our number one reason, the reason we're losing colony is because of Varroa mites, all right? So I brought my bee along, okay, and this bee has a Varroa mite, all right? The Varroa mites over the winter period feed on fat body of the workers from the underneath side. So we really don't ever see them really in our colony because they're in between the segments. All that's left is a little bit of red, a little bit of the mite showing. You can see them if you look closely, but you got to turn the bee over. If you happen to see a mite on the bee, particularly on the top of the thorax, that's a mite that is looking to go into a brand new cell to reproduce. So she stopped feeding on the adult bee. She's now in a very favorable location. So as this bee goes along, if it's a nurse age bee, and pokes her head into a cell to see if that larva needs food, so too will the mite. The mite can tell just at the last stage of the larva. It can tell. So can the worker because they get different food. And if that's the case, then the mite will then simply walk off, walk down antenna, walk down legs, and get into that cell. And then she'll hide. She hides in the food. And then when the larva changes into the pupa stage and the workers put a capping over that cell, then this mite comes out and then she feeds on the developing pupa. All right? Well, it's not the mites that kill 70% of our wintering colonies. It's not the mites. What is happening with this little critter feeding on bees, feeding on fat body of the adults, feeding on the developing body, all those cells undergoing division of the pupa, is she has the possibility of transmitting virus disease. Okay, bees have a lot of viruses, not a problem. But with mites feeding on the adults or feeding on the brood, two virus groups then are favored. One, the form wing virus, named because when adults come out, they don't have formed wings, they can't fly, or paralysis virus, and there's a chronic and there's acute. So by this feeding, this mite is transmitting the ability of these two virus groups to overtake all the other viruses and all the bacteria and all the other fungi and everything that's on bees and on their brood. And then it reaches epidemic proportions, and then within 2 or 3 weeks, your colony is dead. Once the virus gets up to epidemic proportions, okay? So starvation may kill some colonies, but it is by and far the mite that does most of that. And I want to come back in just a second and talk just one more thing to you about mites. In the meantime, so this is to label that's a case of starvation. And I gave a talk on Tuesday night to the group up in Hillsborough outside of Portland. And I talked about how to recognize these other characteristics, other reasons colonies die. The take-home message, if you have a dead colony, I hope you don't, but I know some of you will, that's just on the averages, pick it up now before other bees get in there, scrape all of the frames, get it ready to give it back to bees. If you have it from mites, okay, if it's from mites, there's going to be leftover brood, ugly cells. The cells caps are sunken, there's little holes in them. It's really going to look ugly. Mites are not going to be in there because they have to live on live stuff. Everything in there is dead, all right? So don't be concerned recycling that dead out equipment back into living colonies. If you lost all your colonies, obviously you're going to have to get a swarm or get a source of a nuke or split your buddy's colonies to be able to have a going colony. If there's a lot of ugly stuff in there, then don't give it all to a brand new colony. Give that brand new colony a halfway decent chance to get started. Don't slug it all into a brand new nuke you're just going to get, for example. Okay? So, questions on dead outs, winter dead outs over the winter. Yes, question.
If you get frames from a dead out that someone immediately popped in a freezer because there was some resources on it, and then you get it, someone gives it to you like a couple months later, how would you treat that in using that? Just like what you said?
Just take it out of the freezer, let it come back to room temperature. That'll happen pretty quickly. Yeah. If it's capped honey, that is great. You're feeding your colony. The best feed is capped honey. Mm-hmm. If it is fermenting honey, So the honey is bubbling, essentially bubbling out of open cells, not the cap cells, but open cells, and is then running down the comb. Wait until a little bit later. Put that back in the freezer. Wait till later. We really don't want to feed new spring colonies fermenting honey. Okay? You wouldn't want to eat it, so don't give it to your bees. So that would be the only caution on that.
And any of the pollen that's in there is probably okay, even though it looks.
So the pollen has been stored as bee bread. It has lost some of its nutritive value, some of it, all of its nutritive value, but the bees will go ahead and they'll salvage what they can. Those cells will often be moldy. They'll have this white mold there. We can't clean it up. Nothing you can wash it will get rid of it. So again, feed it to the bees. They will get back. Now, if you got a lot of moldy cells, feed only a frame or two at a time. Let them clean that up, then another frame or two. So if you got a lot of dead outs, you can be much of the summer feeding those frames kind of back to your new colonies.
How can you tell if the honey is fermenting on the frames?
So it is going to be bubbling, and when it gets a little bit warmer, it's going to be bubbling. But for example, when it was put in the freezer, so it's going to be liquid on the outside. You'll get a little bit of liquid, but I mean, it's really stained. You can see the liquid. As soon as you take it out, comes out to room temperature, it starts kind of running out of the frame, out of the cells of the frame.
Is there a pretty good odor when it comes to?
It'll be a vinegary odor. First time out, right out of the freezer, of course, it won't. But by the time you let it sit on your counter, yeah, it'll have an odor, and it'll start being puddling at the bottom of the frame on your counter. Either we get losses in November or December, or they get into January, and then often the queen starts laying some eggs. So after the shortest day of the year, you know, the first day of winter, after that the days start getting longer, and so she'll start laying eggs. And so by February, you'll often see some amount of brood, depending on how big the cluster is. That cluster getting smaller and smaller and smaller, you can actually see the queen. I don't see her in this cluster of bees, and here she's right here. This is the queen here, and this can get down pretty small. I have a photo that's got probably 40 bees in my marked queen. My marked queen had a green mark. Lost her. You know, 40 bees is not going to be enough to start the colony in spring. So every once in a while, we get a brilliant student. A student that thinks outside of the box. So I initially started my beekeeping work at the University of Maryland. And we had been teaching bees back into the 1920s at the University of Maryland. I taught there in the 70s, 70 to 81. The current professor there has recently had two very brilliant students that really were thinking outside the box. One is this fellow, Sammy Ramses, who's now at the University, Colorado University. And he's the one who discovered that these bees riding around on the adults are not feeding on their blood. That's what we wrote. That's what everyone assumed. He discovered when they go in these segments, they're actually feeding on what bees have as fat body. Now that doesn't mean fat in their body. It's an organ. And that stores protein and a sugar source, okay, a different sugar source. So the mites are actually feeding on that. So that's why they're going in between the segments, and we don't see them on the bee's body. And that degrades the bee's body very quickly. And as they feed, they put material in so they can suck material back out of the bee. And that's how the viruses get transmitted from one bee to another. And pretty soon we have an epidemic. So Sam Ramsey discovered that they're actually feeding on fat body, not hemolymph. Very important because of how we then can regulate bees. New student, a guy by the name of Zach Lamas. He's a commercial queen breeder, small scale, Maryland, raising something in the vicinity of 120 queens that he sells, but at a higher price, higher quality. Just recently, then I know Zach, and we were talking about it. In the current May issue of American Bee Journal, he said he has a question here, hidden in plain sight. Why aren't we sampling drones? So he has come up with an entirely new finding, all right? One, right now, mites aren't on the worker bees. They're not on the worker bees. The mites now are on the adult drones. They're not in the worker brood right now when they go into a cell. They're in the drone brood right now. Okay? So our assumption that if I take 300 bees as a sample from your county or my county, I can say how many mites are in that county. That's been our assumption. Bzz, it's wrong, because they're not on the worker bees or they're not in worker brood. So he has a brand new finding. So what we're then now saying is that if you are going to have any chance of keeping ahead of mites, you've got to go where the mites are. Not on the workers, not on the worker brood, but on drones. Okay? So how might we do that? I've got a couple of these articles. This is the May American Bee Journal. Here's an article from Bee Informed. Use your search engine. Importance of spring mite loads. Talks about this work as well. He has also a really nice recording from a talk that he gave to Southwest Michigan beekeepers. If you are on search engines, you'll be able to find that. Use his name. Look for hidden in plain sight or mites on drones. Okay, and it was just recent. So you can find some information to back all this up. Just not me saying it. Okay. So how are we going to get rid of mites? How are we going to control mites in the spring? Our standard method has been, I'm telling you to take a sample of 300 adult bees, and on the basis of that, make a decision. If you take a sample of 300 adult bees, what number do you often get? In the month of April or in the month of May and into June? What number do you often get?
0, 1, 2.
0, 1, 2. So that would say, of 300 bees, that's a very low mite infestation. 0 mites, 300 bees. That's our gold standard for sampling. Wrong, because they're not on the worker bees now in April and May. They're on the drones. All right? So we've got to think about doing something to try to control mites now. So here are our options right now. So here's our mite alert. Our standard way of recommending to do that isn't going to tell you what you need to know. But we're going to have to assume that the mites are there. They've overwintered with the bees, if the bees are alive, and we need to do something. So here are our options. The synthetic apicide, Apivar. This is a synthetic ambitraz chemical. It needs a 6-week treatment period, and then you have to wait to super 2 more weeks after that. So if you go to this weekend and put Apivar in your county, you would not be able to add a super to your county for 2 months, 8 weeks. We're going to get a lot of nectar coming in, and you're going to lose it. If that's your objective in keeping bees, you may not care about how much honey you get, but if that's an objective. So it's a good material. It's our gold standard. It kills 95 to 99% of the mites, but spring, we don't use it. Now, if you're getting nukes, or the queens that you're going to use to put into the club colonies on Saturday, those have come from colonies that have been given Apivar. So Thad and the others have already fed Apivar to their colonies. Okay, all of our commercials have. They've started in January, so it's actually coming out of their colonies. So you probably will not find that. These are the impregnated plastic strips. So you're not likely to find them in your colonies. This is the strip here, okay? And what we do is we put 1 per every 5 frames of brood, so the colony needs 1 or 2, most colonies, okay? So what can we use? Well, we've got acids or we got oils. So the acid that we would use in the spring is formic acid. Comes in pads. We buy it as Formic Pro. Formic Pro comes as these pads, and the directions say 2 pads, but if you continue to read down in directions, it says you can do a half treatment. So 1 pad. Formic is a very strong acid. You've got to use gloves. We prefer that you're using a respirator, but at least goggles when you're using this, and absolutely gloves. It'll burn your skin. It's an acid, okay? And it's harmful to the bees. What does it do? It kills the workers that are developing as larvae. So if I put this on my colony, I start losing all larvae. The bees just cannibalize it, yank it out. And in many cases, particularly with the 2 pads, it stops the queen from egg laying for about a week period of time. Collateral damage. Not very good for your developing spring colony. So it has some usefulness. Now, what we can do then is do the half dosage, 1, not 2, and put this on and leave the packing material around it. Don't take this off, okay? And squish your top right down on it. What that does is it slows the release of the formic and gives your queen a chance to get away, get somewhere else where she's not going to be killed, okay? And the brood that's off to the side may not get killed. So Formic Pro in the spring. It's a good tool. It has the advantage in that it kills the male mites in the developing cells. And it's the only chemical that kills reproducing mites. All the other chemicals are just going to kill the mites on bees. Another material then is the oil. It's sold in 2 different products, Apagard or Apalife Var. This is Apagard. Comes in as a gel. This is an individual service tray. We put a spacer on here so that the material then dissolves. The material is heavier than air. It goes down in colony, so we put it at the top of the colony. We can see we got 2 boxes on the colony, so 1 treatment. And then it will dissolve in about 10 days, and so you replace it with another tray. So you want to get it on a full life cycle. In other words, a full life cycle of bees is 21 days. For the worker bee, egg, 3 days, of course, 6 days of larva, 12 days is pupa, 21 days. So you want to do it and then repeat it. So 2 treatments. Pretty effective. Now, the reason people don't want to use it is it says the directions is it only really is effective of between 65 and 85 degrees. Okay? And that's true. Below 65, you get less kill. Above 85, it disappears too quickly and you don't get a thorough kill. Okay? So these things have a temperature range. But remember, if your colony is rearing brood, and all of them should be by now, what temperature can you, if you stuck a thermometer in your colony, what temperature would it record? 90 plus degrees, 90 to 95 degrees. Okay? And if you put it on a very edge where there are no bees, what would the temperature be? It depends how close it is to bees, but it could be the ambient, whatever temperature is outside. And many days haven't been 65. But remember, where are we putting it? Where there's brood. And so we are within its temperature range. Okay, however, so those are chemical tools, and like any tool. I can put a nail into a piece of wood. I can use the back of my screwdriver, I can use my wrench, or I can get a hammer out of my toolbox and do it much more efficiently. You want to kill Varroa mites. So here are some of those tools. Oxalic acid is the poorest choice you have. That's like taking your fingernail and pushing that nail into the wood. It's that poor. Or your finger, okay? Or your palm. It's the poorest choice. It's a very good choice when there is no brood. And so if you start a package, there is no brood, and that's a material you can use. If you do a split and you put all of the capped honey in the split, as soon as the capped honey hatches, the new brood that the queen has laid is not yet capped. You've got a window of time where you can use it. So you can use it, but it's not a very good tool when there is brood. We usually use it between Thanksgiving and New Year's. That's when it is the hammer to properly put a nail into wood. In other words, the hammer to really kill mites. All right? So good tools, we can use them poorly. The best tool we can think of right now is you manage your bees and you control where your bee colonies raise their drones. What did I say earlier? Where are all the mites? Drone brood. So control where they rear the drones, and then take the drones out before that reproducing mite has a chance to come out with the adult drone. So you raise drones to the cat stage, and then you murder them. You take them out, okay? Good way to do that is to take a frame that has drone foundation. This is the green frame, colored green, so it's different. This is not worker foundation here, plastic foundation. It's drone size cell. It's the bigger cells, okay? So on the edge of the brood area, put one in. You can put two in if you've got a real strong colony. If you have controlled where your colony raises drones, they will immediately accept this great idea you just gave them. Raise drones right here, girls. Right here, okay? And so they will draw them into cells, and the queen will come along and lay the unfertilized eggs, the drone eggs, and then you then murder them before any drones come out as adults on the edge of the frame area. So drone brood removal.
So I read something just recently, and I think it's that article by Zach Lamas in the most recent American Bee Journal, which made me worry about the strategy, because they say, well, usually what people do, they take out this drone brood when it's capped, freeze it, and then give it back to the bees to clean out. Well, I think they mentioned that bees, as they cannibalize the drone brood that's been frozen, can get infected with the viruses. So there's a possibility of virus transmission from that dead drone brood that we give back to them.
So Anna made the point that because they are removing infested drone brood, okay, mites have fed on them, they can then pick up the virus, and as they feed other worker bees, as they feed other as nurses, other bees, the brood food, they can spread the virus, and that is very true, very, very definitely. So yes, question.
Is it okay to feed the drone foundations to the chickens?
So yes, so feed it to something else rather than back to the bees. And so one way to do this is wait until most of the cells are capped, remove it, murder the drones. So one way we do that is put it in a freezer just overnight. So now all those developing drones are dead from the cold of the freezer. And then what beekeepers will do is take their capping scratcher, okay, and then go along and disrupt as many of those caps as they can, okay, both sides. And then if you snap it, many of those drone pupae will fall right out of the cell. That's what you'd feed to the chickens. Or you can't pick them out, it'll take you forever. Or you give the whole frame to your chickens. Just go into where your chickens are and set it up against something. It's a birthday, and Christmas and Hanukkah present, all those presents all in one. Right. And so they'll clean it out. So if you just decap and then give it back, what you've done is you actually killed some of those pupae. And so the virus is all about, and the bees are going to clear it up, and so those bees can become infested. So that's the way we've been doing it. So once again, this is brand new information, so we're going to do another way. So uncap it and give it to the chickens. If you've got kids or grandkids, put it in your stir fry the next morning. They'll never know the difference. They'll love what you've just put into the stir fry. I'm telling you, they really will. Okay, until they finally figure out what you've done to them, and then they.
Have you tried them? Are they tasty?
Oh, they're very tasty. Yes, yeah. Oh, very tasty. Yeah. Now, so you don't have one of these in your apiary. So what could you do? If you have a full-size box, take out a frame and put a medium-sized frame in there. A medium-sized frame. So this will be with workers, your super frame, and then there's going to be about a 3 to 4 inch space here. Bees don't like that space. It's spring. What are they going to do? They're going to put comb in there, and all the comb's going to be drone cells. If you've controlled where they rear the rest of the drones. We can't control it 100%. Don't have that? Another possibility. Take foundation out of a regular frame. Take the whole foundation out and put the empty frame in between two drawn comb. So they're going to build comb. They'll build worker comb often in the middle to anchor this frame, and then the outsides will be the larger drone cells. And you'll be able to tell the difference right away, which is drone cell and which is worker. And then once they get to the cap stage, just use the knife and just cut them right off. Okay? So some other suggestions other than just a green frame. Questions? Comments? Yes.
So with the package, all of the bees are, all the mites on the bees are phoretic. So oxalic works pretty well. How long after installing the package do we have to use oxalic before it's ineffective?
Okay. So the comment, you heard the comment, on package bees, all you're getting is adults and a queen in a cage. So if there are any mites, and there usually are, a small number, they're on the worker bees, all right? Any drones that are in there. You put them in your colony, how long do you have before there is cap brood? Okay? There's a couple of variables. First, we don't release the queen directly. Usually we let the workers chew the queen out of the cage. That's going to be 2 or 3 days. And then pretty soon she gains enough strength and is fed constantly so that she can start laying eggs. Well, that's another couple of days. And then there's 3 days of the egg stage and then 6 days of the larva stage before any cell is capped. So what we have to do is do that treatment with oxalic before the cap stage. So you usually have, a couple days to get out of the cage. Just use 2 or 3 as a number. A day or 2. So we've got a week there. Then she's going to start egg laying, half of a week with the eggs, and then the rest of the week with the other. So you've got about a 2.5 week period where you can use this oxalic. Okay? So you just got to keep counting. Okay, yes.
Do you have any tips to get them to draw out the comb on that?
Um,
Besides put more wax on it?
Put more wax on it if you buy this frame. Tips on getting them to draw this. Strong colonies.
Okay.
Put this frame on the edge of so the brood area is going to be this time of year like a sphere because it's going to get cold at night. So find sort of where that edge is and put this right on that edge. And most useful, don't let them rear drones on their schedule and their place. You control, to make this really work, you control your bees, just drones. You can usually do this 3 times. Okay? But you're going to say to me, well, if I'm controlling drones and there are very few drones in my colony, what's going to happen when my colony replaces its queen? There's not going to be any drones in my colony. That's correct. There are going to be very few drones. And really for mating, they got to have hundreds of drones that form these colonies. But remember, your queen, your new queen, the virgin queen, doesn't go out and mate with brothers. Okay? So she goes from your colony, once she's a virgin queen, out to mate, and she goes a further distance. So she then avoids mating with a brother. So it doesn't matter if you have no drones in your colony. Your queens aren't going to mate with those drones anyway. They're brothers. Okay? And the people that are near you with their bees are not here tonight and are not hearing this, and they're going to raise lots of drones for you. Right? That's those drones your queens are going to mate with. And they're going to mate with 15 or 20 of them. Okay? So it doesn't matter that your colonies don't have queens. It does matter if you have queens, that they have drones. Other questions? All righty. So here's the principle. You know, I'm a biologist, and so that's how I learned bees. I've been teaching beekeeping numbers of years. Okay, it's a big number. I've been teaching over 55 years. So what we're hoping with our spring management is colonies were at their lowest point in January, February, into March. They are now beginning, now that we got some decent weather and some pollen, they're now beginning this huge, steep increase, their population increase. And then they're going to go to 40 or 50,000, depending how much food they get, how many bees. There are a number of variables. So they're going to go from 10,000 to 50,000 in a very short couple of months. Well, we don't want to do anything to mess up that growth. This is the growth we want to mess with, and this is the growth of the mite in the colony. So very few mites come through winter. Might be only half a dozen mites, all right? So they start reproducing, but if they go into drones, those mites reproduce 3 identical females to themselves, okay? 3 mature females in drones, only 1 in a worker. So their numbers then start increasing. What is most dangerous for our colonies and why mites kill the majority of our overwintering colonies is this peak. You see, the peak is after the worker peak. So there are more mites in a colony. Once your colonies start decreasing in size in the fall, there are more mites. And if this number is very large and they start affecting the virus, so there's some variables, then your colony is going to collapse and you're going to have a dead out, right? So where do we want to try to control the mites? Right here. What does that do? A term we've been hearing with our own COVID virus. It flattens the growth curve. They don't grow as rapidly. They don't grow as many mites. So come the most dangerous time of the year, September, October, there are fewer mites. Okay? This is the time of year we have a great deal of difficulty controlling mites. Our tools that I just mentioned, none of them work very well. In fact, what we do, if you've got a high mite number, nuke the heck out of them with formic acid. Kill the queen. Kill as much brood as you can if you want to have any chance of getting it through winter. You've got to be really severe with them. The apivar, the acids, the thyme oil, not strong enough. You got to almost kill the colony to kill the mites. Sounds sad, but that's what we got to do at this time of year. So give yourself a heads up. You manage the bees by controlling there. Biology make any sense? The new finding that they're on drones, not workers, make any sense? All brand new stuff. If you want to see the article, as I say, there are a couple ways you can do it. There is a recording that's available for the club after. How do you do this? Yep. You can go back, but I gave you my email. I'll do it again, and it's on that flyer. If you kept one of the flyers, and I'll be glad to answer your questions. Then.
So, in that article, they suggest to sample drones. So instead of killing 300 earth bees in an alcohol wash, they suggest to pick up and kill 40 drones in an alcohol wash and see how many mites there are. But, I mean, what should be the threshold?
Okay. You probably know there's a lot of things we can do with bees, all right? So they have this finding. What they don't have yet is how many drones do you have to find and sample mites, and how many of them do we have to control? So that's the next step, and they're working on it, okay? But that's going to take 2 or 3 field seasons. So we're right on the cusp of knowing something valuable. And if we are trying to manage our bees and keep those nasty mites at a lower level, jump on it now, even though we don't have all the answers to these questions. And there are a lot of good questions. And he brings up some of them in the article. I get follow?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I guess, would it be a good strategy to simply uncap the drone brood to disrupt mite reproduction?
Yes. So a good strategy would be every time you go in, wherever you see them raising drones, take your capping scratcher and make a mess in those drones. Yes. Now, in part, we may be transmitting some more virus, so we've got to figure, is that a great strategy or is it just a good strategy? Okay. Many of us kill the drones, when you pop 2 boxes and you clamshell in the spring, okay, to look for queen cells. In between the boxes, what is that brood? Almost always it's drone brood. And so by disrupting those cells, we've killed that drone brood, and then some of us will take the hive tool and get rid of it anyway. So we're doing some of it already. But on this time, you actually want them to raise drones where you know they are, and you can get at them again and then murder them. Okay, politely eliminate them. Okay.
So before they decided that the mites were on the drones, if you read any of the books, it tells you that the mites are reproducing inside the brood cell.
They still are.
They still are, even though the mites are on the drone, but they're still reproducing in the brood cell,
In the brood
the
cell.
mites themselves. So the drones are transferring the female mites to the brood cell.
Again, there's not enough research to be able to say one way or the other. I mean, drones don't feed. They hang around. They watch TV all day. They drink beer at night. I mean,
Typical male.
typical male.
But-
So we can't answer
So
that.
they don't really know, I mean,
No.
obviously, if they're still rearing mites in the brood cell, they're transferring from the drone. So I
Well,
just wonder if
maybe they still go to a
technology's
nurse age. Maybe they still quickly jump to a nurse bee, and then so they're not on a nurse bees long enough for us to take a sample. One other, and this gets deep into the biology, but one other thing is so if you want to know how many mites are in your colony, you've got to kill all the bees, look at every single cell, and count all the mites on the bees and in every single cell. Students at OSU did that. They did that to 6 colonies, okay, to be on one of their experiments. But you have a dead subject. You've killed your colony, okay? Well, that's not very good. So we take a sample. All sampling protocols, unless you're using a special statistical test, all sampling protocols have a basic assumption that you're sampling a random sample of a population. The other thing that Zach found out is the mites are not randomly distributed in the bee colony. So all of our work to try to find a sampling method, 300 adult bees, wash them with alcohol, is not based on science. It's because they're not randomly distributed, even in the adults. So we've got a lot of catch up to do. Isn't beekeeping fun? Just when we think we know something, well, we don't know something, because if you look on the PNW honeybee survey, on this survey, if you go in there and you look at the last report, which would be last year, you'll see that the level of losses of Oregon backyard beekeepers has been very constant, just under 40% for 13 years. Some years it's very heavy, half. Last year it was lighter, 1/4. 13 years, 40%, okay? So we've learned some things, but we obviously still haven't learned. With the European bee, which the bee we keep, the mites have all the advantage, okay? They're an introduced pest. They didn't come in with their baggage, their viruses and their enemies. And it turns out that the mite is originally on a host from Asia, a honeybee, another honeybee, not our honeybee, but another one. And that honeybee controls mite numbers. And it does because it rears its baby bees faster than 12 days in the cap stage, and it raises drones for a very short period of time. One of the great things with Italian bees is once they learn how to produce brood, they do it all summer long. Even though by the end of blackberry bloom, we don't have very much, your Italian colonies are just raising brood like crazy. That's their biology. And raising drones roughly until into July, after the longest day of the year, after the end of June, okay? Then they cut off rearing drones. So this does not work in the fall. This is only a spring technique, all right? So European bees have been just an ideal host. So the mites have all these advantages to grow, reproduce. Our bees have this many, okay? And then in addition to what we do is we take our bees and we put them all together in our backyard. 2, 3, 4, 25, 72 colonies, okay? Big backyards, all right? What we do is we transmit where the mites are then able to go from one colony to the other. So what if they kill half of those colonies? 72 colonies in a commercial apiary. Okay, but they're only killing a quarter, so let's say they're killing 30 colonies. That means there's still over 40 colonies that they are living in and not killing. Okay? No good parasite wants to kill its host. It doesn't have a host anymore. But the way we beekeep, we're favoring their reproduction, the mites. Question, comment?
So what about these hybridized bees that they've been breeding, like the ankle biters that are supposed to be a little bit more hygienic and sensitive to mite populations? Are
So,
those actually
good question, great. So, one of the things any strategy that we've got to rely on a chemical, and I showed you 3 of them, is doomed for failure because the parasite, in this case the mite, is going to find a way to get around it metabolically, and that's called resistance, all right? So they'll find a way to get around that chemical eventually. So our hope for being beekeepers and reducing that loss below 40% is that the bees are enjoined in the fight. We get better bees. We get better bees by doing some breeding activity to find bees that are better ankle biters, they're better groomers. So they get rid of the mites in that phoretic stage when they're on the adults. We breed bees that are better for hygienic behavior. Hygienic bees walk around and they smell a mite in a cell, okay? Somehow they can smell that mite reproducing. And then what they do is they open the capping and the mite runs out. But the babies that she's rearing in that cell cannot run out. They don't have the hardened body. And so we've killed that mite's one reproductive potential. Mites on average have only about 4 reproductive periods in their life. They only produce about 30 eggs, okay, in their whole lifetime. And so if you disrupt 1 of 4, you've shortened the mite reproduction by 1/4, potentially by 1/4, because you interrupted that breeding cycle. So hygienic behavior, uncapping, another good way. I keep Africanized bees in Bolivia, and I don't have to treat for mites. I don't treat for mites there because I have bees, the Africanized bees, that rear their worker bees in the cap stage in less than 12 days. So Mrs. Mite goes into the cell, but she can't reproduce herself. She can't produce a new adult female in many of the cells. In some they can, but not in all. And so I've reduced, instead of an average reproduction of something in the vicinity of 3 per mite as an adult mite, I've reduced it in my Africanized bees, it's reduced to 0.5. And what that does is it keeps the mite levels at that low level. They never get to that high peak. So there are a number of ways that bees could get enjoined in this. The ankle biters, good strain, Russian bees brought from far reaches of Russia that had not been exposed to the pesticide, so they're using cleaning as well. The VSH, the Varroa sensitive hygiene, or the one that the hygienic behavior that they uncap. Now there are a few populations that go one step further and do even better. And some bees, not only do they uncap, and then they recap the cell, so they don't kill their developing sister. Those are 2 different sets of genetic backgrounds, genes, alleles that involve that. Our breeders have worked on the uncapping behavior. We don't have much recapping behavior in our bees. Can we capture that and bring it in? The obvious answer is yes. And a group of breeders are doing that. So there's a group of bees that are called Hilo queens in the Hilo area of Big Island, Hawaii. And what they are doing there is they are breeding bees that are not only hygienic, but also do the recapping. All right? And so those bees are going to be even better in the fight. So any of these are a step up. So if you're going to requeen, get something that has one of these stocks. The ankle biters, the hygienic, get one of those, and your bees will do better. Doesn't mean we can not do any treatment, but we can reduce the number of treatments and what kind of treatment we select to do. The reason the program for mite biters started at Purdue University in Indiana, and it spread to beekeepers in Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, and I think into Illinois. And so they have a number of people that are involved in that. The program in Hilo, Hawaii started with one individual, but he's had income money from some commercial beekeepers that see that promise. The secret in both of those breeding programs, who the queen mates with. So these programs are controlling the drones, okay, for those 15 to 20 matings. Whereas all the queens we get from California, they are rearing fantastically good queens, but then they're mating with whatever is in that area 15 or 20 times.